I stood frozen in the middle of my own living room, but the space felt alien. Carelessly taped cardboard boxes were stacked on top of each other, carrying the dusty smell of a forgotten attic. On the stone fireplace I had cleaned by hand, brick by brick, my pictures snapshots of me laughing with friends. A proud photo in front of my design office had been taken down. In their place were old family photos, forced smiles from gatherings I had long tried to forget. My mother Linda was busy arranging a gaudy bouquet of artificial flowers on the coffee table. My father Robert stood with his arms crossed, his familiar authoritarian air seeming to have returned after years of fading. My brother Kevin, the one always considered the golden child, was casually lounging in our grandmother Eleanor's favourite armchair, scrolling on his phone as if he owned the place. They were here in my house after 5 years of deafening silence. 5 years without a single call, not one text message, even when I was on the brink of despair. And now they had appeared with luggage and a shameless sense of entitlement. "You've done a lot with the place," Linda said, her voice laced with feigned surprise. "Much more spacious than I remember." I didn't answer. My throat was dry, but not from fear. It was a cold, quiet rage, a painfully familiar sensation. "Well," Robert chimed in, his voice always carrying a superior tone even when he had nothing left. "This house has 3 bedrooms, and you're living here all by yourself. Such a waste of space." Finally, I found my voice, though it was just a hoarse whisper. "What are you doing here?" It was then that my father looked directly into my eyes. His gaze was cold, devoid of any remorse. He spoke the words I knew would haunt me forever, a second knife twisting into an old wound. "We're staying. A house this big is meant for a family." Linda added her voice, soft but venomous. "You don't even have a family, Chloe. We are your family." "Family," I repeated, and this time my voice was steadier. A dry laugh escaped my chest. "Families don't break into each other's homes." Kevin finally looked up from his phone, a familiar smirk playing on his lips. "Don't be so dramatic, Chloe. We were going to call you. We just wanted to get settled in first." Settled in. They called picking the lock on my back door, moving their belongings into my home, and rearranging my life, getting settled in. Robert took a step toward me. "Chloe, be realistic. You have your little business and we've fallen on hard times. Family helps each other out." "Help each other out?" I asked, indignation rising like a tidal wave. "Help is what I begged for 5 years ago when I lost everything and had to sleep in my car. Where were you then?" Silence filled the room. The confidence on their faces cracked just for a moment, but only for a moment. "That's in the past," my father dismissed. "We're talking about now, and right now we need a place to live. This house emotionally is ours too. It belonged to your grandmother." "Grandma left it to me," I said through clenched teeth. "To me alone." "A mistake of old age," he replied cruelly. "But regardless, the decision has been made. We're staying." I looked at them one by one. My father, the man who taught me that a person's worth was measured by their bank account. My mother, who silently condoned every injustice. And my brother, who happily enjoyed every privilege while watching me struggle. They saw nothing wrong with their actions. To them, this was their right. I was just a means to an end. I didn't scream. I didn't argue further. The tears didn't fall because I had learned my lesson a long time ago. Instead, I calmly pulled my phone from my coat pocket. "What are you doing?" Linda asked, a hint of nervousness in her voice. I didn't answer her. My finger swiped across the screen and I pressed the 3 numbers I hadn't needed for the past 5 years. 3 numbers that represented the final boundary, but to understand the cold calm in my fingers as I dialed 911, you have to understand the first time they abandoned me, the first time they showed me that to them I truly didn't exist. It all started long ago in a typical suburban house in Seattle, Washington. On the surface, we were a model American family. My father was a vice president at a local bank, always dressed in expensive suits. My mother was a manager at a private clinic who kept the house spotlessly clean, and my brother Kevin, 3 years my senior, was the family's pride and future. From a young age, I felt the difference. Kevin was an investment, I was an expense. His mediocre grades were celebrated with fancy dinners, while my A's were met with a simple, satisfied nod. When Kevin was accepted into the University of Washington, my parents threw a huge party and bought him a brand new BMW. They drained nearly all their savings to ensure he could graduate without a single dollar of debt. Meanwhile, from my freshman year of high school, I was told I'd have to save for college myself. At 16, I was balancing school with a 20-hour-a-week job at a local coffee shop. There was never any talk of prestigious universities for me. The message was clear, though. Never spoken aloud, Kevin was destined for success while I just needed to have a stable life. The only person who truly saw me was my maternal grandmother, Eleanor. She lived about an hour's drive away in a small, rustic house with a lush garden. Every summer I spent 3 weeks with her while Kevin attended expensive sports camps. Those weeks were my salvation. "Chloe," she would say while teaching me how to grow roses, "don't you ever let anyone tell you what you're worth. Only you can decide that." Her hands, wrinkled from decades of gardening, would gently hold mine. "And never depend on someone else for a roof over your head. Learn how to build it yourself." Grandma Eleanor had raised 3 children on her own after my grandfather passed away. She was a seamstress, but had managed to put all her children through school. Her strength and independence became my guiding light, especially when things at home became suffocating. The pressure from my parents peaked when I was preparing to apply for college. My mother decided I should major in accounting. "It's a stable career, Chloe. You'll always have a job," she said, completely ignoring my passion for digital art and design. My father agreed. Creative jobs are for people with rich families to fall back on. When I won a statewide design award, my parents dismissed it as a nice hobby. The tension came to a head when I received an acceptance letter from an art school in Portland with a partial scholarship. That evening at the dinner table, my father declared firmly, "This family will not waste money on an art degree. If you want to throw your future away, you can pay for it yourself." I looked to my mother for support, but she just stared at her plate. Kevin, home from college for the weekend, smirked from across the table. "Maybe you should listen to Dad, Chloe. Not everyone is cut out for a real career." That night, I cried. But the next morning, I made my decision. I would go to Portland, work full-time, and pursue my degree no matter what. When I announced this, my father just shrugged and said, "Your life, your mistake." And that was when, for the first time, I truly understood that to them I was on my own. The call ended. "The police are on their way," I announced into the silent room, my voice eerily steady even to myself. The shift in the room was almost palpable. My father's smugness curdled into a simmering rage, his eyes narrowed. My mother's nervousness morphed into panic. She began to wring her hands. Kevin just looked annoyed, as if I had interrupted his favourite TV show. "What have you done?" Robert roared, taking a step toward me, but stopping when he saw I didn't flinch. "You're calling the police on your own family. Do you have any idea how this will humiliate us?" "This is my house," I replied, emphasizing each word. "And you are trespassing. I gave you a chance to leave peacefully." "Peacefully," Linda sobbed, the tears starting right on cue. "We just wanted to be with our daughter. We have nowhere else to go. You're throwing your own parents out on the street." Her performance no longer worked on me. Those tears once would have broken me, but now they were as transparent as her lies. "You had a choice 5 years ago when I had nowhere to go, and you made your choice." We stood in a tense standoff, the silence broken only by my mother's sniffles and the ticking of my grandmother's old grandfather clock. Each second stretched for an eternity. I could see my father calculating, trying to find a new angle of attack, a weak spot to exploit. But he found none. The wall I had built around myself over the past 5 years was made of a material he couldn't penetrate the truth. Soon flashing red and blue lights swept through the living room windows, casting dancing shadows on the walls. A knock came at the door, firm and authoritative. Kevin was the first to break the silence. "Damn it, Chloe, you actually did it." I walked to the door, feeling their eyes drilling into my back. I opened it to find 2 police officers on the porch, an older one with a world-weary face and a younger, more alert one. "Good evening, ma'am. I'm Officer Miller. This is Officer Davis," the older one said. "We received a call about a trespassing situation." "Yes, officer," I said, keeping my voice steady. "This is my home. These people are my family, but they entered while I was away without my permission and are now refusing to leave." Officer Miller looked over my shoulder into the house. "Ma'am, can you show me some identification with this address?" "Of course." I pulled out my wallet and handed him my driver's license. He examined it carefully before handing it back. Just then, my father decided it was time for his power play. He strode forward, putting on the smile he used for important clients at the bank. "Officers, I think there's been a big misunderstanding. I'm Robert Miller and this is my wife, Linda. This is our daughter, Chloe. It's just a small family disagreement. I'm sure we can sort it out ourselves." Officer Miller was unmoved. "Sir, your daughter says you entered her home without her permission. Is that correct?" "We don't need permission to enter our family's home," Robert said, his smile a little strained. "Actually, sir, you do," the younger Officer Davis interjected. "If this is not your legal residence and the homeowner asks you to leave, you have to comply." "But we have nowhere to go," Linda cried, stepping up beside her husband. "She has this whole big house while we... She couldn't finish the sentence, dissolving into another sob. I felt a tiny pang of familiar guilt, a conditioned reflex from childhood. But then I remembered. The cold feel of the driver's seat of my old Honda Civic, which had been my bedroom dining room and prison for 2 weeks. The memory came back in vivid detail. After they had slammed the door in my face that rainy night, I had driven to a 24-hour Walmart parking lot. It was the safest sanctuary I could think of. I reclined the driver's seat as far as it would go, trying to sleep as the headlights of other cars swept across the windows. I had 20 done in my pocket and a nearly empty tank of gas. Desperation was a bitter taste in my mouth. Every morning I would go to a cheap gym I still had a membership for just to take a shower. I'd get dressed in a cramped bathroom stall, trying to look presentable for hopeless job interviews. During the day, I would sit in the public library using their computers to apply for jobs and search for cheap rooms to rent. I lived on granola bars and $1 burgers. Every night I called my parents, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails that were never returned. I texted Kevin dozens of times, begging for help, even just a word. He read every single one and never replied. The lowest point came on a Saturday night. I had driven past my childhood home, an act of self-torture. Kevin's car was in the driveway. Through the dining room window, I could see all of them, my father, my mother, and my brother. They were laughing. They were eating a warm dinner while their daughter and sister was starving and shivering in a car less than a mile away. In that moment, something inside me died, the fragile illusion that they were capable of loving me. And something else was born, a cold, steely resolve. "Does she have any proof?" Officer Miller's voice pulled me back to the present. My father was talking, trying to sow doubt. "Yes," I said, my voice now completely devoid of hesitation. "They broke the lock on the back door. You can see for yourself. And I also have a security camera." The look on my father's and brother's faces changed. They clearly hadn't anticipated that. "All right, that's enough," Officer Miller said, his tone now impatient. "Sir, ma'am, and you, young man, this is Ms. Wilson's home. She wants you to leave. I'm giving you 30 minutes to gather your essential belongings and vacate the premises. If you fail to do so, I will have to arrest you for criminal trespassing." "You can't do this," Robert protested. "This is an abuse of power." "No, sir. This is law enforcement," the officer said firmly. 30 minutes. Starting now. Officer Davis walked with me to check the back door. The metal latch was bent and the wood around the frame was splintered. Definitely signs of a forced entry, he said, making a note in his pad. Do you want to press charges, ma'am? Yes, I said without a second's hesitation. I do. The next 30 minutes were a blur of resentful chaos. My mother wept as she haphazardly threw clothes into a suitcase. My father barked orders at Kevin like a defeated general, his voice filled with angry mutters about ungrateful children and injustice. Kevin moved with sullen resentment, deliberately bumping into furniture. They dragged their boxes and bags out onto the porch under the watchful eyes of the two officers. As they were ready to leave, my mother turned to me, her eyes red from crying, but not with tears of remorse. They were tears of anger. I hope you're happy, Chloe, she hissed, alone in this big, cold house. I looked her straight in the eye. I've been alone in a cold car. I think I'll be just fine. My father didn't say another word. He just gave me a look that promised retribution before turning on his heel and stalking to his car. After they drove away, Officer Miller handed me a card. This is the incident report number. We recommend you go to the courthouse tomorrow morning and file for a temporary restraining order. That will give you legal protection if they try to come back. Thank you, officer, I will. I closed the door after they left, the click of the new bolt sounding loud in the silence. My home, my sanctuary, felt violated, tainted by their presence. The scent of my mother's perfume lingered in the air. Their family photos were still on the mantelpiece. I walked around the living room, picking up each of their picture frames and tossing them into one of the cardboard boxes they had left behind. Then I began to clean, putting my furniture back where it belonged, trying to erase every trace of them, but I knew the invisible scars would last much longer. As I stood in the now quiet living room, looking out at the garden my grandmother had so lovingly tended, I didn't feel victorious. I just felt a deep, profound sadness and an overwhelming emptiness. I had done the right thing, the necessary thing, but in doing so, I had to officially acknowledge a heartbreaking truth. I had no family, and as that truth settled in, I felt something else rising from within freedom, a terrifying, but also promising freedom. I was no longer bound by their expectations, their manipulation, or their guilt. The road ahead was my own for me to build, just like Grandma Eleanor had always said, and this time, I would make sure my walls were high enough that no one could ever breach them again. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the old house, every whistle of wind through a window frame made me jump. I lay in bed, but my mind was still in the living room, replaying the confrontation. I heard my father's voice, felt the manufactured despair in my mother's tears. The emptiness that followed their departure had given way to a low, simmering anger, a deep resentment, not just for what they did today, but for all the years they made me feel invisible. At dawn, exhausted from lack of sleep, I got up and made a strong pot of coffee. Sitting in my kitchen, looking out at the garden, slowly coming to life in the morning light, I felt a resolve harden within me. Officer Miller was right. I needed to protect myself, not just with new locks, but with the force of the law. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was Mark, my best friend and the first business partner who had believed in me when all I had was a laptop and a dream. Hey, I just got your message. Is everything okay? You sounded off, he said, the genuine concern in his voice a soothing balm. I took a deep breath and told him everything from coming home to find them moved into the confrontation and calling the police. I recounted it mechanically, as if telling someone else's story, because if I let emotion in, I was afraid I would shatter. Mark listened in silence. He didn't interrupt, didn't judge. When I finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Chloe, he finally said, his voice low and serious. I am so sorry you had to go through that, but I'm also so incredibly proud of you. You did the right thing. Did I? Mark, I threw my own family out on the street. They put themselves there, not you. They crossed every boundary, both legal and emotional. You were just protecting your home and your peace. That isn't selfish, it's survival. His words were an anchor holding me steady in the storm of my emotions. "What do you need? I can be there right now." "It's okay," I said, feeling a little stronger. "But I am going to the courthouse this morning to file for a restraining order." "Good, that's a smart move. Let me know if you need me to come with you. Don't face this alone." "I know. Thank you, Mark." The call ended, but the warmth of his friendship remained. He was part of the family I had chosen for myself, a family built on mutual respect and support, not obligation and manipulation. The county courthouse was a cold, impersonal building, a stark contrast to the chaotic emotions churning inside me. I sat filling out the forms, the dry legal terms clinically describing the deep betrayal I had endured. Unlawful entry, harassment, infliction of emotional distress. Each box I checked was another cut to the already frayed thread of family ties. As I waited to see the judge, a text message popped up on my phone. It was my mother. "I couldn't sleep. My heart is broken thinking about you calling the police on your own parents. We made mistakes, but we are family. I just hope you can find it in your heart to forgive us. I love you." My hand trembled. It was a masterclass in manipulation, a perfect blend of victimhood and emotional appeal. 5 years ago, this text would have made me crumble, but now I could see right through it. She wasn't sorry for breaking into my home. She was sorry she got caught. She wasn't talking about making amends, only about my forgiveness. The love she spoke of was conditional, a currency used only when they needed something. I didn't reply. I turned off my phone and focused on my purpose for being there. When my turn came, I walked into the small courtroom. The judge was an older woman with sharp eyes that didn't miss a thing, but they weren't unkind. I presented my story briefly and clearly, providing the copy of the police report and the photos I'd taken of the broken lock. She listened intently, nodding in a few places. "Ms. Wilson," she said when I finished, "based on the evidence you've provided, the court finds sufficient grounds to issue a temporary restraining order. This means your father, mother, and brother are prohibited from coming within 100 yards of you or your residence. They are also prohibited from contacting you in any way. A hearing will be set in 2 weeks to determine if this order should be made permanent." Holding the paper in my hand, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a shield. It was validation from the outside world that my boundaries were real and deserved to be respected. On the way home, I called a locksmith. An hour later, a man came and replaced every lock in the house, including the broken one on the back door. He also installed a more modern security system with better cameras and an alarm. When he left, I felt like my house was truly a fortress. My sanctuary was secure. That evening, I decided to do something I hadn't done in a long time. I cooked myself a proper celebratory meal. I roasted a piece of salmon sautéed asparagus with garlic and made a fresh salad. As I sat alone at my dining table in the quiet of the house, I remembered the nights of eating cold burgers in my car. Tears started to roll down my cheeks, but this time they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of gratitude. Gratitude for having survived. Gratitude for the strength I had found in myself. Gratitude for this house, Grandma Eleanor's legacy, which was not just a shelter, but a testament to my resilience. The fight might not be over. I knew the hearing in 2 weeks would be difficult. But tonight, in my own fortress, with a hot meal and a legal shield for the first time in a long time, I felt safe. And I knew no matter what came next, I would never let anyone take that peace away from me again. The 2 weeks passed in a state of high alert. Every car that slowed down on my street made my heart race. Every call from an unknown number made my stomach clench. The temporary restraining order provided a fragile sense of security, but I knew it was just the quiet before the storm. I hadn't received any further communication from my family, but I knew that didn't mean they had given up. It just meant they were planning their next move. During this time, work became my refuge. I threw myself into design projects for elevation designs, finding an order and control in lines and colours that I couldn't find in my personal life. Mark had given me a major project rebranding a local coffee shop chain that was expanding, and I latched onto it like a lifeline. The late nights, the creative meetings, and the satisfaction of seeing an idea take shape kept my mind from spiralling into anxiety. Mark was an incredible pillar of support. He was more than a friend. He was a fortress wall. He checked in regularly, not to pry or rehash the trauma, but just to talk about normal things. A new movie, a restaurant opening, client gossip. That normality was a gift. He helped me feel like I was more than the sum of my wounds. One afternoon, about a week before the hearing, I was in my home office, the room over the garage that Kevin had tried to claim as his bedroom, when an email arrived. The subject line was a single word: family. The sender was a lawyer I had never heard of, Arthur Vance. My heart began to pound as I opened it. The letter was short and clinically cold. He introduced himself as the legal representative for Mr. Robert, Mrs. Linda, and Mr. Kevin Miller. He stated that his clients would be contesting the permanent restraining order and, furthermore, that they were preparing a lawsuit to dispute the ownership of the house. The basis of the suit, he wrote, will be undue influence and the diminished mental capacity of the deceased Mrs. Eleanor Vance at the time the will was drafted. I had to read that sentence twice. Undue influence, diminished mental capacity. They were accusing me of manipulating my own grandmother. They were smearing the memory of the only woman in the family who had ever loved me unconditionally. A white-hot rage, hotter than anything I had ever felt before, surged through me. This was no longer about a place to stay. This was an attack on everything I held sacred. They were trying to rewrite history to turn my grandmother's love into a crime and me into the villain of my own story. I immediately forwarded the email to my lawyer, Ms. Henderson, with a short, furious message. She called me back within 10 minutes. "Calm down, Chloe," she said, her voice calm and steady. "This is a classic intimidation tactic. It's designed to scare you, to make you second-guess yourself, maybe offer some kind of settlement to avoid a court battle. Don't fall for it." "But can they do that, Ms. Henderson? Can they actually sue me for the house?" "Anyone can sue for anything. The question is, can they win? And based on what you've told me, the answer is almost certainly no. Your grandmother's will was drafted by a reputable attorney. It was properly witnessed. Did you say she had regular health checkups?" "Yes," I said, remembering. She had high blood pressure, so her doctor always checked her cognition every 6 months. She was sharp as a tack until the very end. "Excellent," Ms. Henderson said. "We can subpoena those medical records. They will be irrefutable evidence. As for undue influence, the burden of proof is on them. They have to prove that you coerced or manipulated her, an incredibly difficult thing to do, especially when the will reflects the long-standing, loving relationship you've described." The conversation with Ms. Henderson helped douse the flames of rage, replacing it with a cold resolve. They had chosen the battlefield. Fine, I would meet them there. Over the next few days, I began to gather my own evidence. I went through old boxes in the attic, searching for the letters and cards my grandmother had sent me over the years. Every single one was filled with love, wisdom, and unwavering support for my life choices. "My dearest Chloe," one letter read from when I had just moved to Portland, "never doubt your path. Your parents may not understand, but that is because they measure success in numbers. You measure it in passion. That is a much better yardstick." Another from a few months before she passed read, "This house has always been my happiest place, mostly because of the memories I have of you here. I hope one day it will be your safe harbour and a source of inspiration too." I carefully placed each letter in a folder. This wasn't evidence of undue influence. This was evidence of love. I also found old photographs, me as a little girl helping her in the garden, me as a teenager proudly showing her my first design work, Me and her sitting on the porch, drinking tea and laughing. In every picture, the bond between us was unmistakable. I was ready. I didn't just have the law on my side, I had the truth. The day of the hearing, I wore a navy blue pantsuit, a suit of armor for a modern battle. Mark offered to come, but I declined. This was something I had to face on my own. When I walked into the courtroom, I saw they were already there. My father, my mother, and Kevin sitting with their lawyer. My father looked angry and defiant. My mother looked anxious, avoiding my gaze. Kevin just looked bored. They looked like strangers. I sat down with Ms. Henderson, placing my folder on the table. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, but my hands were steady. I stared straight ahead toward the judge's bench. I would not let them see me scared. I would not let them see they could affect me anymore. Grandma had taught me how to build my own roof. Today, I was here to defend it. The judge from the first hearing, the woman with the sharp eyes, entered and took her seat. The air in the small courtroom was thick with tension. This was not an abstract legal fight. This was a family schism laid bare, its wounds and betrayals to be dissected under the cold light of justice. Their lawyer, Arthur Vance, went first. He was a middle-aged man with carefully coiffed silver hair and a smug smile that seemed permanently affixed to his face. He spoke in a smooth, practiced monotone, trying to paint a picture of grieving, infirm parents alienated by their only daughter, who had usurped what should have been a family asset. "Your Honour," he began, "we are here today not only to contest an unnecessary and punitive restraining order, but to bring to light a deeper injustice. My clients, the Millers, dedicated their lives to raising their children. Now, in their time of greatest need, they find themselves deprived of family comfort and support by their own daughter, Ms. Chloe Wilson." He went on describing their forced early retirement and Kevin's financial struggles as if they were mitigating factors for breaking and entering. He framed their arrival at my house not as an invasion, but as a desperate attempt at family reunification. Then he moved on to the will. "We have reason to believe that Mrs. Eleanor Vance, an elderly and frail woman in her final years, was unduly influenced by her granddaughter, Ms. Wilson took advantage of her grandmother's affection to ensure she would be the sole heir of a significant asset, cutting out the deceased's own daughter. It was a convincing performance if you didn't know the truth, but I did. And when it was Ms. Henderson's turn, the truth began to unfold. Your Honour, Ms. Henderson began, her voice strong and clear, a stark contrast to Mr. Vance's synthetic smoothness. What we have just heard is a fairy tale spun from desperation and greed. The truth is much simpler and much crueler. Miss Henderson started by laying out the indisputable facts, the police report of the break-in, the photos of the broken lock. These are not the actions of a family seeking reunification. This was a calculated act of trespass. My client was away on a business trip, and her family took advantage of her absence to unlawfully occupy her home. Then she called me to the witness stand. My heart was pounding, but I walked with a steady gait. Miss Henderson walked me through the events, but then she asked a question I wasn't expecting. "Ms. Wilson, this isn't the first time your family has rejected you, is it?" "No, it isn't," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Can you tell the court what happened 5 years ago?" And so I told them about losing my job, the months of desperate searching, the eviction. I told them about the phone call to my parents, my plea for help, and their cold refusal. I told them about that rainy night, about my father slamming the door in my face. I told them about the 2 weeks I lived in my car, about feeling abandoned and invisible. As I spoke, I didn't look at my family. I looked only at the judge, letting her see the truth in my eyes. The room was silent when I finished. Even Arthur Vance had lost his smug smile. Ms. Henderson moved on to the will. "Your Honour, the opposing counsel has made a serious and baseless accusation of undue influence. We have evidence to refute that completely." She submitted my grandmother's medical records to the court. showing the regular cognitive tests with their excellent results. Then she produced the letters and cards. These are letters written by Eleanor Vance to her granddaughter over many years, Ms. Henderson said, handing a stack to the court clerk. They do not paint a picture of a woman susceptible to manipulation. They paint a picture of a wise, strong woman who had a deep and loving relationship with her granddaughter, a relationship based on mutual respect and understanding which it seems other members of her family did not share. Finally, Ms. Henderson called my father, Robert Miller, to the stand. He was confident at first, answering his own lawyer's questions smoothly, but under Ms. Henderson's cross-examination, that confidence began to crumble. Mr. Miller, you stated that you believe your mother-in-law's will did not reflect her true wishes. That's right. She was old. She wasn't thinking clearly. Then can you explain this letter? Ms. Henderson placed a letter on the projector, and my grandmother's handwriting filled the large screen for all to see. It was the letter she wrote me saying the house would be my safe harbour. This was written just 3 months before her passing. It seems quite clear to me, my father sputtered. She could have been coerced into writing it by Chloe. Coerced, Mr. Miller, was your daughter present when she wrote this letter? I don't know. In fact, she was not. She was in Portland, hundreds of miles away, trying to run her business. Now, Mr. Miller, let's talk about 5 years ago. Your daughter called you when she was about to be evicted, correct? We were having our own difficulties at the time. Did your difficulties include being homeless, Mr. Miller? No, but... Did you own a 3-bedroom house at that time, with a spare room where your daughter could have stayed for a few weeks? Silence. Yes, he admitted reluctantly. And you chose not to help her. You slammed the door in her face, did you not? My father didn't answer. He just stared into the middle distance, his face flushed with anger and humiliation. No further questions, Your Honour, Ms. Henderson said, returning to her seat. After both sides had rested, the judge looked over all of us, her gaze lingering on my parents and brother for a long moment. I have heard the testimony from both sides, she said, her voice devoid of sympathy. And this is what I see. I see a young woman who has worked hard to build a life for herself despite a lack of family support. I see that she was abandoned by the very people who should have protected her in her moment of greatest need. And I see that when she finally found security and success, those same people returned not with remorse but with a shocking sense of entitlement, attempting to take what was not theirs by force. She looked directly at my parents. The accusation of undue influence is not only without merit, it is an insult to the memory of Eleanor Vance, who, by all accounts, was an intelligent and decisive woman. As for the restraining order, your actions were not just inappropriate, they were illegal and frightening. Ms. Wilson has every right to feel unsafe in her own home. Therefore, the court rules as follows. The permanent restraining order is granted. Mr. Robert, Mrs. Linda, and Mr. Kevin Miller are prohibited from coming within 100 yards of Ms. Chloe Wilson or her residence. Any attempt at contact will be considered a violation of this order and will be prosecuted. As for the potential civil suit regarding the property's ownership, I would advise you to reconsider. Based on what was presented today, it is frivolous and could be deemed a vexatious lawsuit. She banged her gavel. Court is adjourned. A stunned silence fell as the judge left. Then I heard a choked sob from my mother. My father and Kevin sat frozen, dumbstruck. Arthur Vance quietly packed his papers, his smugness completely gone. Ms. Henderson and I stood up. As I turned to leave, my eyes met my mother's. For a split second, I saw something other than anger or self-pity. I saw a flicker of genuine regret, a dawning realization of what they had done. But it was too little too late. The crack had become an uncrossable chasm. I walked out of the courtroom and into the bright hallway, feeling as if a tremendous weight had been lifted. The legal battle was over. I had won. But it didn't feel like a victory. It just felt like a sad, necessary end. I had saved my house, but I had lost my family for good. Or maybe I had simply acknowledged a truth that had been there all along. Stepping out of the cold courthouse and into the fresh Seattle air, I felt like I had woken from a long nightmare. The legal burden was lifted, my protective shield now forged in the steel of the law. But the victory brought no elation. It left only an emptiness, a final acknowledgement that the bonds I had once craved were truly and irrevocably severed. In the weeks that followed, life slowly returned to normal, or at least a new version of it. The silence from my family was absolute. No guilt-tripping texts, no blocked calls, no lawyers' emails. It was as if they had evaporated from my life, leaving a void where the chaos used to be. I tried to fill that void. I poured myself into work with a renewed energy. The rebranding project for the coffee shop chain, the daily grind, became my passion. I spent hours researching, sketching logos, and building a brand identity that reflected the warmth and community the owners wanted to convey. Mark and I worked closely together, our late-night brainstorming sessions often fueled by pizza and coffee. In those moments, I felt a sense of belonging. Elevation Designs wasn't just a business, it was a testament to my perseverance. Every happy client, every successful project key was another brick in the life I was building for myself. You know, Mark said one evening as we were reviewing the final designs for the daily grind, "You've changed. You're stronger." "I don't feel strong," I admitted. "I just feel tired." "They're two sides of the same coin," he replied, looking at me with a deep understanding. "You fought a battle no one should ever have to fight. Being tired is natural." But you didn't back down. That's strength, Chloe." His words meant more than he could know. He saw my struggle not with pity, but with admiration. My social life began to blossom again too. I no longer felt the need to isolate myself in my fortress. I started saying yes more often. Yes to after-work drinks with colleagues. Yes to a neighbour's invitation to join a book club. Yes to Mark's suggestion that we try a weekend pottery class. The pottery class was a revelation. There was something meditative about turning a formless lump of clay into something useful and beautiful. My hands, so used to the precision of a computer mouse and digital pen, learned a new language, one of feel and imperfection. "You've got a knack for this," Sarah, the instructor, commented as she passed my potter's wheel. "I'm just making a lopsided bowl," I laughed in response. "No, you're making something unique," she corrected. "The imperfections are what make it interesting." Those words resonated with me. Maybe that was true for life too. The scars and broken pieces weren't necessarily signs of weakness. They were proof of a life lived, of battles fought. One Friday evening, Mark took me out to dinner to celebrate the daily grind, officially approving our designs. We went to a small, cozy Italian restaurant we both loved. "To success," he said, raising his wine glass. "To our biggest project yet." "To us?" I replied, clinking my glass against his. "And thank you, Mark, for everything. We're a team," he said simply. As the dinner went on, our conversation drifted from work to more personal topics. We talked about dreams, fears, and past relationships. I realised that although we'd been friends and partners for years, there were depths to each other's lives we'd never truly explored. There was a comfort and ease between us that I'd never felt with anyone else. On the drive home, a comfortable silence filled the car. When he parked in front of my house, he didn't rush to turn off the engine. "Chloe," he began, his voice hesitant, "I know this has been a really hard time for you, and the last thing I want to do is make things complicated." He paused, searching for the words. "But I have to say this. Our friendship means the world to me, but over the last few months, I've started to feel something more. And I was just wondering if you ever felt that way too." My heart skipped a beat. I looked at him, really looked at him, in the dim glow of the streetlight. I saw not my business partner or my best friend. I saw Mark, a kind, intelligent, and steady man who had stood by me through my darkest moments without asking for anything in return. I thought about the ease of our conversation, the way his laugh could light up a bad day, the safety I felt in his presence, and I realized his feelings weren't one-sided. Perhaps hidden beneath the ashes of my old family, a seed of something new and beautiful had been sprouting without me even knowing. Yes, I whispered, my voice barely audible. Yes, Mark, I feel it too. A relieved, radiant smile spread across his face. He didn't lean in to kiss me. Instead, he simply reached out and took my hand. That handhold in the quiet of the car said more than any kiss could. It spoke of respect, of patience, of a new beginning built on a solid foundation of friendship. When I walked into my quiet house that night, the emptiness I had felt after the hearing was gone. For the first time, the house didn't feel like a fortress against the world. It felt like a home, a place where I could start building a new future, not alone, but with someone who had seen my worth even when I couldn't see it myself. My relationship with Mark bloomed naturally and gently, like my grandmother's garden waking up after winter. There were no dramatic gestures or rushed declarations. Instead, it was a series of small, meaningful moments that wove a new tapestry of intimacy. It was the way he'd bring me coffee in the mornings, when we had an early meeting, remembering exactly how much cream I liked. It was the way I'd find myself smiling at my phone at a funny text from him. It was spontaneous dinners, weekend walks, and the comfort of being able to sit in silence together without feeling the need to fill the space. Working together took on a new dimension. Our partnership had always been strong, but now it was infused with a deeper understanding. We learned to navigate the line between business partners and romantic partners, finding a rhythm that worked. Elevation Designs no longer felt like just my business. It felt like ours, a shared dream we were building together. About 6 months after the court hearing, I received a letter. Not an email or a text, but an actual handwritten letter mailed to my home address. The familiar script on the envelope made my stomach clench. It was my mother's handwriting. I left the unopened letter on the kitchen counter for 2 days. Part of me wanted to throw it in the fire to protect the peace I had fought so hard to win, but another small, stubborn part was curious. Finally, one evening, with a mug of hot tea for courage, I opened it. The letter was not long, and it was different from the guilt-laden text she had sent before. "My dearest Chloe," it began, and the word dearest didn't feel manufactured. "I know I have no right to write to you, and I will understand if you tear this up immediately. I am writing not to ask for your forgiveness because I know what we did is unforgivable. I am writing because I need to say the truth perhaps more for myself than for you." That day in court was a wake-up call. Hearing you tell your story, not through the filter of your father's self-justification or Kevin's indifference, but from you, it broke me. I sat there and realized I had failed you as a mother in every way that mattered. I was silent when I should have spoken. I chose comfort over compassion. I let your father's bitterness and my own favoritism blind me to the love I should have had for you. I make no excuses for our actions in coming to your house. It was wrong driven by desperation and wounded pride. But the real failure happened years before that when we left you alone. Your father and Kevin have not changed. They still believe they are the victims, but I can't anymore. I left. I am living in a small apartment and have found a part-time job. I am trying to learn how to stand on my own 2 feet. Something I should have done a long time ago. I don't expect a reply. I just wanted you to know that somewhere in the world I am thinking of you with a profound regret and an immense pride for the woman you have become, not because of us, but in spite of us. Love, Mum. I read the letter 3 times, hot tears rolling down my cheeks. This wasn't manipulation. This was repentance. For the first time, she acknowledged my pain without a single but. She saw me. The letter didn't erase the years of hurt, but it filled a small crack in my heart I didn't know was there. It wasn't a reconciliation, but it was a closing, an acknowledgement. I let Mark read the letter. He read it carefully, then set it down. "What are you going to do?" he asked gently. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Maybe nothing. At least for now." I put the letter in a box with my grandmother's mementos. It didn't belong to the painful past, nor did it belong to my bright future. It belonged in its own space, a space of complexity and unresolved feelings, and that was okay. A few months later, on a beautiful Sunday afternoon, Mark and I were working in the garden. I was weeding my grandmother's rose bushes, and Mark was fixing a loose board on the wooden fence. The air was filled with the smell of damp earth and lavender. "You know," Mark said, straightening up and wiping sweat from his brow, "I love this place. It feels so peaceful." "Me too," I said, smiling. The house was no longer a fortress. It had become a home, a place of life and growth. Mark walked over to me, his hands still smudged with a bit of dirt. He looked around the garden at the house and then at me. There was a seriousness in his eyes I hadn't seen before. "Chloe," he said, his voice deep and warm. "Last year your life was turned upside down by people trying to claim this place. They said a house is meant for a family." My heart constricted at the memory of those words. "They were wrong about everything," he continued, "but they were right about one thing. A home is truly meant for a family, not the one you're born into, but the one you choose, the one you build." He dropped to one knee, there among the rose bushes, pulling a small box from his pocket. "Chloe Wilson," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "You are my family. You are my home. Will you build a family with me right here in this house?" He opened the box. Inside was a simple, elegant ring with a small sapphire the same colour blue as my grandmother's eyes. The tears came again, but this time they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. Words failed me. All I could do was nod a frantic, repeated nod as laughter and sobs mixed together. He slipped the ring on my finger. It fit perfectly. As I looked at it sparkling in the sun, I saw more than just a promise of a future with Mark. I saw the culmination of a long journey, from being abandoned to being cherished, from being homeless to creating a home, from believing I had no family to realizing I was right in the middle of the one I had always dreamed of. Planning a wedding was nothing like I had ever imagined. There were no tense arguments over guest lists with a mother, no pressure to meet family expectations. Instead, it was a joyful, creative process between me and Mark, much like how we tackled a new design project together. We decided on a small, intimate ceremony right in Grandma Eleanor's garden. The place that had once been the battlefield for my survival would now be the stage for my new beginning. The idea felt deeply symbolic, a way of reclaiming the space and filling it with happy memories. Our guest list was short, comprised only of our chosen family. There was Sarah, my pottery instructor, who taught me the beauty of imperfection. There was my kind neighbour who had brought me the first casserole when I moved in. There were a few cherished clients who had become friends. And of course, Mark had his best friend from college as his best man. When I thought about my maid of honour, only one person came to mind. I called Eleanor Garcia, the former colleague who had found me in that coffee shop, who had offered a hand when the world had turned its back. Though we lived states apart, we had kept in touch, our friendship cemented by its extraordinary beginnings. "Eleanor," I said over the phone, "are you free the first weekend in September?" "What for, girl?" her voice boomed as warm as ever. I'm getting married, and I can't think of anyone else I'd rather have stand beside me. There was a pause on the other end, followed by a sniffle. Oh, honey, I'll be there. I wouldn't miss it for the world. The wedding preparations became a labour of love. I designed all the invitations and stationery myself, using a climbing rose motif inspired by the garden. Mark, with his woodworking skills, built a beautiful wooden arch for us to stand under. We chose every flower, every dish on the menu together, making each decision a part of our shared story. A week before the wedding, a small package arrived. There was no return name, just the address of the small town where I knew my mother was living. I hesitated for a moment before opening it. Inside, wrapped carefully in tissue paper, was an old silver hair comb decorated with tiny pearls. I recognized it instantly. It was the comb my grandmother Eleanor had worn on her wedding day, and that my mother had worn on hers. It was an heirloom, the something old. Tucked with it was a short note in my mother's shaky handwriting. Grandma would have wanted you to have this. May you have a lifetime of the happiness you deserve. Mum. I held the comb in my hand, feeling the weight of its history and the complex emotions it carried. It wasn't an invitation back. It was a blessing from a distance, an acknowledgement that my life was moving on, and she, in her own way, was celebrating for me. I decided I would wear it, not for my mother, but for my grandmother, and for the acknowledgement that even the most broken pasts can contain beautiful fragments. The wedding day arrived, a perfect September day, with a clear blue sky and a crispness in the air. The garden was decorated simply but beautifully, with strings of fairy lights in the trees and mason jars of wildflowers on the tables. As I stood with Eleanor getting ready to walk out, I felt a familiar pang of anxiety. What am I doing, Eleanor? Am I really ready for this? She took my hands, her eyes serious. Chloe, look how far you've come. You survived betrayal, homelessness. You built a business from nothing. You fought for and won back your home. Marrying a good man who loves you. Trust me, honey, this is the easy part. She was right. I took a deep breath and walked into the garden. As I walked down the petal-strewn aisle, there was no father at the end to give me away. But I didn't feel a loss, because I was walking toward the man who had chosen to stay, the man who had helped me stand on my own. When I reached Mark under the wooden arch, he looked at me, and in his eyes I saw admiration, respect, and a deep, unconditional love. The ceremony was short, sweet, and intensely personal. We wrote our own vows. Mark spoke of how he had admired my strength and resilience, but what he loved most was my kindness and my ability to see beauty in the world, even after everything I had been through. When it was my turn, I looked into his eyes and said, Mark, you came into my life when I was building fortresses, and instead of trying to tear them down, you helped me build doors. You taught me that family isn't something you're born with, but something you build with love and trust. You are my home, and I promise to spend the rest of my life building a beautiful life inside these walls with you. When we were pronounced husband and wife, and Mark kissed me, the cheers of our beloved friends erupted around us. In that moment, the garden wasn't just a space. It was full of love, friendship, and hope. Later, as the reception was in full swing, Mark and I stole a quiet moment on the porch, watching our guests laugh and dance. Are you happy? I asked, leaning my head on his shoulder. Happy doesn't even begin to cover it, he whispered, kissing the top of my head. Look, Chloe, look at our family. And I looked. I saw Eleanor laughing her head off at one of Sarah's jokes. I saw my neighbours chatting with my colleagues. It was an eclectic mix of people from different parts of my life, all brought together by love and friendship. He was right. This was my family, a family carefully chosen, cultivated with kindness, and held together not by obligation, but by the conscious choice to be there for one another. My grandmother's hair comb glinted softly in my hair, a reminder that the past, however painful, had led me to this perfect moment. I hadn't just built a house, I had built a family to live in it. Married life settled into a deep, peaceful rhythm I had never known. The house, once a symbol of my solitary independence, now filled with laughter and shared routines. There were lazy Sunday mornings that smelled of coffee and pancakes, evenings spent working side by side in comfortable silence, and the simple joy of knowing there was someone to come home to at the end of the day. Elevation Designs continued to thrive. With Mark's business acumen and my creative vision, we became something of a power couple in Seattle's small business community. We hired 2 junior designers, turning the office over the garage into a vibrant, collaborative space. I loved mentoring them, passing on my knowledge, and watching young talent grow. I saw a bit of myself in their eagerness and their insecurities, and I made sure they always felt supported and valued. A year after our wedding, Mark and I made a big decision. We wanted to expand our family. The thought of bringing a child into this world, into this house, was both thrilling and terrifying. Could I break the cycle of hurt? Could I be the mother I never had? I shared these fears with Mark one night as we sat by the fireplace. I'm scared I'll repeat their mistakes, I confessed, that I won't know how to love unconditionally. Mark took my hand, his gaze steady. Chloe, love isn't something that's just in your blood. It's a skill, a choice you practice every single day. You chose to love your friends. You chose to love me. You've built an entire life based on kindness and empathy despite every reason to be bitter. You are going to be an amazing mother because you know exactly what it feels like not to be loved, and you would never, ever let your child experience that. His words were the antidote to my doubt. 9 months later, our daughter, Eleanor Grace Miller, named for my grandmother and for the grace she brought into our lives, was born. Holding her for the first time, a fierce, all-consuming love washed over me, so powerful it almost took my breath away. It was a love without conditions, without judgment. I looked at her tiny face and I made a silent promise to her and to myself that she would always know she was loved, cherished, and safe. Motherhood changed me in ways I couldn't have anticipated. It softened my sharp edges, filling the last empty corners of my heart with a new purpose. The house now echoed with baby laughter and silly lullabies. The garden became a playground with a small swing hanging from the branch of the old oak tree. When Ellie was 2, I received a call from a hospital in the city where my mother lived. "Are you Chloe Wilson?" a clipped female voice asked. "We're calling about a patient, Linda Miller. You're listed as her emergency contact." My heart sank. "What's wrong?" "Your mother has had a severe stroke. She's in critical condition." A conflicting wave of emotions washed over me. Shock, a flicker of old anxiety, and a cold detachment. She had listed me. Even after leaving, after everything, I was all she had. I talked it over with Mark. "I don't know what to do," I said. "Part of me feels like I should go, but another part feels nothing." "You don't owe her anything, Chloe," he said gently, "but you owe yourself peace. Do whatever will help you sleep at night, whichever decision that is." In the end, I decided to go. Not for her, but for me. I needed to face this final ghost. Mark stayed home with Ellie, and I made the 3-hour drive a familiar journey into a past I had tried to bury. I found her in the intensive care unit. She looked small and frail in the hospital bed, surrounded by beeping machines. The left side of her body was still, her face slack. She was conscious, but unable to speak. Her eyes widened when she saw me, and I saw a single tear trace a path to her temple. I sat in the chair by her bed. I didn't know what to say, so I just sat in silence. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel pity. I just felt a vast, encompassing sadness for a life wasted, for relationships broken beyond repair. After a while, I took out my phone and showed her a picture of Ellie, a smiling, gap-toothed toddler with blonde hair and my grandmother's blue eyes. My mother's eyes locked onto the photo. A choked sound escaped her throat. She tried to move her right hand, lifting it shakily toward the phone. I understood. I placed the phone in her palm. She stroked Ellie's face on the screen with her thumb, and her tears fell without stopping. In that moment, I saw her not as the mother who had hurt me, but just as a lonely, broken woman facing the end of her life, mourning the grandchild she would never know. I stayed for another hour, just sitting in that shared silence. Before I left, I leaned down and gently took her good hand. "Goodbye, Mum," I whispered. She gave my hand the faintest squeeze. That was all. Driving home, I felt a final sense of release. I had gone. I had faced the past. And I had walked away with a heart free of hate, filled only with a quiet acceptance. When I pulled into my driveway, Mark and Ellie were waiting on the porch. I scooped my daughter into my arms, burying my face in her sweet-smelling hair. I looked at Mark over her shoulder and he smiled at me, a smile full of understanding. I was home, not the house of wood and nails, but the real home built of love and acceptance and choice. The cycle was broken, the future was a blank page, and I was ready to write it. My mother passed away 3 days after my visit. The hospital called to let me know. There was no funeral as far as I knew. I received no calls from my father or Kevin. The final, thinnest thread was gone, dissolved into silence. I spent an afternoon sitting in my grandmother's garden, not mourning the mother I had lost, but the one I never had. Then I took a deep breath and went on with my life. The years passed in a gentle, happy rhythm, marked by joyful milestones. Ellie grew into a bright, funny, and deeply kind little girl who had her great-grandmother's independent streak and her father's warmth. She loved the garden, and I taught her how to tend the roses, telling her stories of the strong woman who first planted them. The house was filled with art projects, impromptu dance parties, and constant laughter. When Ellie was 5, we welcomed a son, Samuel or Sam. He was a quiet, thoughtful soul with a love for books and stories just like Mark. Watching them play together under the oak tree, I would often feel a contentment so profound it was almost painful. This was everything I had ever yearned for in my loneliest nights, a sense of belonging, a love that was unshakable. Elevation Designs had become one of the most respected small branding agencies in the region. I had stepped back from the day-to-day work to spend more time with the kids, taking on a creative director role, while Mark ran the business side. Our partnership had evolved into a perfect balance of work and home. One Saturday afternoon, while I was in the kitchen with Ellie and Sam making cookies, the doorbell rang. It was odd as we weren't expecting anyone. I wiped my hands on my apron and went to the door. Standing on the porch was a man who looked vaguely familiar. He was thinner, his hair was receding, and there were tired lines around his eyes. It took me a moment to realize it was Kevin. I stood frozen, my hand on the doorknob. He was alone. He looked lost and uncertain, a stark contrast to the smug older brother I remembered. "Chloe," he said, his voice hoarse. "I'm sorry to just show up." "What do you want, Kevin?" I asked. My voice was calm but cool. The restraining order was still in effect, and he was violating it. I needed to talk. 5 minutes, please." There was a desperation in his voice I had never heard before. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to slam the door. But then I saw Ellie peeking out from behind my leg, her eyes wide with curiosity. I didn't want her to see anger. 5 minutes, I said, stepping out onto the porch and closing the door behind me. "Talk." He took a shaky breath. "Dad died. Last month, pancreatic cancer." It was fast. The news hit me, but not in the way I might have expected. There was no profound grief, just a strange emptiness. Another chapter closed. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. Kevin nodded his eyes on the porch floor. "After Mum died, things fell apart. Dad just got more bitter. He pushed everyone away, even me. I lost my job a few years back, got into debt again. I hit bottom, Chloe, just like you did." He looked up, and for the first time in my life I saw genuine remorse in his eyes. When I was down there with no one left to blame, I did a lot of thinking about everything, about you, about what we did. There's no excuse, Chloe. We were awful. I was an awful brother. I was jealous of you, jealous of your talent, jealous of your strength when you went out on your own. And instead of supporting you, I joined in with them to tear you down. Tears started to roll down his cheeks. I'm not here asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I just needed to say it. Needed you to know that I know. I'm trying to get better. I went to rehab. I'm working a regular job. I'm trying. Silence hung between us, broken only by the sound of my children's laughter from inside. I looked at the man before me, not as my childhood rival or the accomplice to my family's betrayal, but just as a broken human being trying to piece himself back together. Thank you for telling me, Kevin, I said softly. You're violating a restraining order. You need to leave now. He nodded, wiping his tears. I know. I'll go, Chloe. You've built a beautiful life. You deserve it. He turned and walked away, not looking back. I stood there for a long time after he was gone. When I went back inside, Mark was standing there, a worried look on his face. Who was that? It was Kevin, I said. I told him what happened. He pulled me into a hug. Are you okay? Yes, I said, surprised to find that it was true. I am. It's really over. That night, after the kids were asleep, Mark and I sat on the porch swing, my grandmother's favourite. The night sky was clear and full of stars. I used to think this house was a curse, I said, leaning my head on Mark's shoulder. A source of conflict and pain, but I was wrong. It was never the house, it was always about the people in it. And now it's filled with the right people, he said, squeezing my hand. I looked up at my home, the warm light spilling from the windows. I could hear the faint ticking of the old grandfather clock from inside. I thought about the journey that had brought me here, from a cold car to the warm embrace of my family, from betrayal to redemption, from building fortresses to learning to build doors. My grandmother had been right. Never let anyone tell you what you are worth, and never depend on someone else for a roof over your head. Learn to build it yourself. I had built my house, but more importantly, I had learned that a home isn't just made of wood and nails. It's built with love, forgiveness, and the courage to choose your own family. And in the home I had built, I had finally truly found peace.